security, I guess, design class. My name is Toe Cutter, or Not Bob, or That Australian Man, and I'm here to basically discuss the shadowrun corporations as a concept and how they protect those things that other people might. So, we've all been in that situation where Mr. Johnson has told us to sneak into an As Technology Death Squad pyramid and retrieve an item of great power. But as a GM, figuring out just exactly what As Technology would do to stop those wily Shadowrunners is somewhat difficult, especially for a new person who's sort of coming to the setting and getting used to the fact that corporations have about the same legal rights as government states. And that's honestly the biggest change in Shadowrun. Extraterritoriality, the decisions have changed how corporations act. Quick crash course. Everyone probably knows what this is, but extraterritoriality effectively means that you can write your own laws and govern your own territory as you want. Second edition describes it as a piece of land that is completely owned, and not like secretly owned. It has to be openly owned by a corporation, has to be secured by a corporation with a physical barrier, and I believe there's one other thing, but those are the two big ones that you can't sneakily own it. It has to be well marked. This is Renraku Computer Systems Technology property, and it has to be sort of your own. You have to protect it. So, as a disclaimer, Shadowrun is a game where you can't really talk about in general. It's a game of exceptions. What I say might be different for another corporate security, because no corporate security will ever really be the same. Every site is different. The people working on the site are different. The NPCs, the players, all that will be subject to change. This is just a brief guide to sort of figure out the ins and outs of security. So, a lot of this information I'm bringing from the second edition book, Corporate Security Handbook. I highly recommend finding a copy of this, because it is very, very good at explaining how the corporations protect their territory and what they do to intruders. It's a bit old. It's not super useful for anything related to the Matrix, and the rigging stuff's a bit outdated, and not all the magical stuff is super up to date, but the physical security and the combat and all that kind of stuff, mwah. So I've looked at other sort of books, and most of this is also just coalesced in my brain, so now it'll coalesce in yours. So let's get down to number one, the simplest way of keeping people out: physical security. So there are 5-ish sort of security topics I'll be talking about. There's a 6 that I won't be. So it's physical security, technical security, magical security, matrix security, and personnel security. And the other one is executive security, but that's like bodyguarding and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to talk to you about how to keep your CEOs from getting their heads blasted off. That's more of another topic entirely. So physical security, what is it? Well, it's anything that makes it harder for someone who's outside to get in. So hills, walls, lakes, fences, landmines, traps, all that kind of stuff. Things that just are physically there to stop you. So the first thing that a corporation will do when they are designing a site, now this is if they're designing or buying, is to look at the natural security barriers that already exist, like hills or lakes that they can turn into moats, rivers, that kind of stuff. If a corporation can make the local environment work for them, they will 100% hire a corporation like Knight Errant to do some landscaping and to make sure that the ground they work on is safer, for them at least. So you can see this, for example, if there's a very large hill on the other side of a corporate enclave that they've sort of excavated to be like a mural to, employee of the week in AR or whatever. But it's a 5-meter drop on the other side because they've excavated a large section out of it. So if you're a runner who's like, oh, don't worry, we'll sneak over the fence and, oh, crap. Because 5 meters is a lot. But more importantly, it's not easy to climb back up if you get caught. So if you grab the MacGuffin and need to start running back to the escape vehicle, but you didn't bring a rope, you are royally screwed. Same with if there's a lake. The corporation could potentially build something in the middle of the lake, make an artificial island, and then chuck crocodiles. Crocodiles are a fun one because as long as you're not in somewhere where they wouldn't exist because it's too cold, they'll just hang around. You can augment them with all kinds of crazy stuff, make their jaws even stronger, hook them up with like meth injectors so they get really enraged anytime someone falls into their water. But they're also lazy enough to not really want to leave their lake. So, pros and cons. Then you've got man-made barriers. So man-made barriers are things like walls, fences, that kind of stuff. So I'll get right down into those two. You have a number of walls and fences that you can make. The most common are brick, chain wire. So brick, wire, plasticrete. You can have metal, but it's up to you. The most common ones would be plasticrete, because plasticrete is really effective. It's really cheap for corporations to build, and it's solid. Like knocking your way through a concrete barrier, which is like a meter thick, is gonna hurt. Wire is easier for if corporations want to see out of it, and that's a big issue. You can't really see through a brick wall, but that's not always a bad thing for the corporation, especially if they're doing some dodgy shit behind the brick walls. The Corporate Security Handbook that Knight Errant created often advises that you want them to be at least 2.5 meters tall and no more than 5 centimeters from the ground. This is so that a troll can't just climb over it without any assistance, and a dwarf can't wriggle their way under it. Anywhere between 2.5 to 3 meters is probably what you're going to be seeing walls at. I don't know if you've ever seen one that, but that's a big wall. That can look intimidating as well, but you need to be able to delineate what territory is. Now, on top of the walls, you can add all kinds of crazy stuff. You can add electrified wires to shock people as they try and climb over. You can add, barbed wire to sort of grab them, or like rip their clothes, so you can start using that as a material link. You could have sensors on the top of the walls, which will activate when something lands on it. That, in the case of anywhere where there's a lot of wildlife, tend to send off a lot of false alarms, so you can use that to your advantage if you're trying to get over it. Monowire is a fun one, but highly illegal, so you usually put those on walls inside your extraterritorial property. All kinds of good stuff. And a common tactic is to have 2 walls or 2 barriers apart from each other, creating a no man's land in between. And then you make sure that you have checkpoints to go in through each of those walls at different areas. So you can't just go straight. You have to go in, turn right, then turn left to get in. This stops riggers from just being able to just drive forward and then suddenly get into your, building. By doing that, having a no man's land, it becomes easier to patrol with things like dogs or drones or anything like that, and means you can put traps in there to deal with runners. I can sort of talk about traps in a bit. Also really good are bollards. They're personally one of my favorite sort of corporate security devices because they're ubiquitous today and they're even better in the future. If you have the time, I highly recommend looking up automated bollard tests, because in 2019, we have examples of like semi-trailers and 18-wheelers rolling forward, tripping a sensor, and then a bollard flips out of the ground, immediately totaling the vehicle. In 5th edition, the rules say that if you try and ram a bollard, it forces a crash test. You just crash, which can be incredibly deadly. However, a lot of times, with the wireless, and I'll get into wireless security and why, it can be a player's best friend. You can disable it if it's connected to a sensor, if you sabotage the sensor so it doesn't pop up, or if you sabotage the button someone needs to push, all kinds. You want bollards to be something players can find out about, but if they don't look into the facility and instead try and ram it, then bud. And that's being said, you can just have bollards be around the place as sort of just showing that please don't try it. And the corporations will often sort of advertise bollards as a way to protect against all kinds of drivers, not just drivers who are trying to ram you, but say, for example, you lose control of the vehicle for some reason and you start swerving off the road. Bollards can save lives because, it stops the vehicle in its tracks and doesn't hit anyone on the ground. But I'll move on to everyone's favorite thing as a GM, traps. So there are so many different ways that corporations can build a trap, and the best part about them is they love them because you just have to set them up, and if it catches someone, you've done your job. You don't have to usually you don't have to monitor it. You can just sort of set and forget. Now, you do tell your security and your employees don't walk on the grass, and you make sure that you really tell them why. And if people know why that's the thing, then they can figure it out by doing social infiltration and all that kind of stuff. But some traps that are quite fun are the pitfall trap. Now, corporations love this one because it's incredibly cheap. You basically dig a hole, which you can't jump out of, and then it can be inside or outside. Inside, you have basically fake floors, which, if over a certain weight threshold, fall down and you fall down. So, for example, you might have some roto drones, which don't actually touch the floor, patrolling that area, not humans. And if a human steps on a tile, they fall out, can't climb back out. Or outside, you could have some fake grass over an area and, go old school. You step on it, you slip, you fall down, you land on a sensor mesh, and immediately, weep, 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 the alarms go off and they figure out what they've caught. Cheap, effective, and really sort of good at catching people who don't know where they're stepping. Another one are gun sensors. So I mentioned earlier having a hill, that 5-meter wall, chuck a gun turret in there, go around the corner, activate a door you're not supposed to, minigun can pop out, shoot you in the back. Just having pop-out gun turrets or activatable gun turrets is an incredibly useful thing for a lot of corporations to use. Gas vents, again, incredibly good. Getting runners into an area like an airlock or, a place they can't easily escape from, closing the doors and then just venting Neurostunt or 7-7 if your corporation is of that persuasion. To handle runners is a really solid way of nullifying threats without putting much in the way of risk. Glare traps are also a thing. This is sort of a bit old school, but you can use it in 5th edition. Whereas if the alarm goes on, all the lights in a certain area basically they turn up to 11, and you are effectively blinded. So if you look at the effects table in the core rulebook of Shadowrun 5e, you can see that light and darkness share the same sort of scale, meaning that it's really effective, I believe, on trolls who have thermographic vision, but also just really effective on anyone because suddenly full glare, you're taking a -6 to all actions as light just penetrates your eyeballs and, everything you've got is helping you see in the dark, and suddenly the lights are on. Whereas the guards can roll up and the lights aren't pointing at them. Also, they've got sunglasses or extra dampening for their brain, but so they can shoot you easier. And the following are for more evil or sort of paranoid corporations. Minefields. Ares fucking loves minefields. They will dig up holes and just put bombs in it and say, yeah, this area is a minefield, stay off the grass. To the point where they can just put a sign that says "Stay off the grass. This area is a minefield," and people will just straight up believe it, even if they don't install it. And mono-wire mazes is the last one. So if you've seen the Resident Evil movie where they bring the laser beams and they have to start dancing around them because they cut people into pieces, yeah, that. Like, you can just deploy a mono-wire maze, which you can't see unless you get 4 hits on a visual perception test. And you might be walking through an area and then suddenly, there goes your hand. It's really brutal. So do make sure that your players are able to see what's coming through legwork. Now, that's one of the most important things that I'll talk about later, but legwork is key to runners being able to avoid all these issues. So yeah, I mentioned a little bit about lighting earlier in the traps, but lighting itself is also a way of doing physical security, because good lighting means it's harder to sneak around. You can't really sneak if there's no shadows to hide in and you're just walking down a road. A lot of corporations know that and will spend a lot of money on these big, like, stadium lighting towers to make sure that their, areas can be seen and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if the lights go out, then everyone's eyes have to adjust to a dark, and then they have to set those up again. And some of the really bright lights can take up to 5 minutes to kick in. So if you manage to pop the outside lighting electricity, suddenly you're really easy to sneak in, whereas it might have been impossible previously. Can also be used to give off light sneakily. So light pollution is a thing, and you might not want runners to know that the guards can see everything they're doing. But orcs, trolls, and dwarves and elves all have the ability to see in the dark with low light vision. So you can kind of just have UV floodlights providing the same amount of light as you would with regular lights, just humans can't see it. And unless they have special glasses. But it's really interesting for, corporations like Telestrian, for example, who maybe hire only elven security, to then just have the assumption be everyone else can see this bright light and anyone who can't is an intruder or doing something shifty. Windows are another way of physical security. So you've got all kinds of different windows: bulletproof glass, regular glass, shutters on the windows, and they're good. You kind of need to have your wage slaves be able to see the sun, otherwise they get really sad, and then they don't be as productive. And you want to be as productive as possible, so you give them a little window. Issue is you can climb into the window, and it's a potential security hack. Windows also look nice. Corporations love being able to look nice because the aesthetics are what sort of a lot of them stand out with. One other trap that I sort of forgot to mention are lockdown shutters are really good. So for example, if an alarm goes off, you can just have like shutters go down, which means like they have to break through metal poles every door they want to go through, which slows it down. If you've played Payday the Heist or Payday 2, that kind of system, and it's quite good to sort of give more time for the runners to have to deal with. Another fun one is a marking system. So for example, if you're walking through an area or you're running through, blast of air hits you, or blast of paint, whatever you want it to be. You run away because you're running away from corporate security shooting guns at you, but you've just been marked by RFID tags, which the corporation is going to use to follow you. Any good runner worth their salt will have a RFID tag eraser, but it's good to get the gang members and the idiots who don't do that. And finally, for physical security, doors. Doors are really effective. The walls can be, thick steel, which is impenetrable, but the door, if it's got too much of leverage between the side of the hinge and the actual frame, person with a crowbar can fuck that up entirely. Or if you skimped out on the doors and went really hard on the walls or vice versa, then you can just break through whatever's not meant to be there. So that also leads into sort of my next point, which is technical security and locks. Because a door is only a security device if you can't just open it. So I guess I'll just jump straight into the tech side. So I've talked about all the physical ways you can sort of stop, and that's not an exhaustive list. It's just whatever has come to mind. But you can ask me questions at the end in the Q&A about other ideas or anything like that. So do note down your questions, and we'll get to them, and it'll be more chill then. But so technical security are the technological stuff you can do, all the robots and the high-tech electronics that get employed to stop runners from breaking in. So one of the ones I mentioned was locks. So there are two main types of locks. You've got mag locks, and then you've got non-mag locks, like keyhole locks, which you can sort of open as a lock today. Mag locks are by and far more common because they're connected to the internet, which allows security to do way more of them. And by being connected to the matrix, it means they can do things like scan when they open and closed. If you require an RFID tag to open it, that RFID tag might have information about who opened and closed it. So you can start collecting logs. You can also shut down doors wirelessly and just enter them into a lock, all that kind of good stuff. So mag locks are very common, and there's an entire chart about breaking into mag locks, which I'm not going to go into, but basically pick a way to open and close the door and go with it. A lot of time in very secure areas, they'll probably use double security, like double biometric security. So you not only need someone's eye, but you need someone's hand as well. So you might do a thumbprint and look into the like a glass and then bing, or you might need to breathe on something and hit a key card. But that's not only really the super secure ones. And it also means if they're keeping your biometrics on file, that biometric needs to be kept on file. So that's a potential way of identity theft or things like that to happen. However, voice prints are also a thing. Scanning people's face, just sort of pin numbers or numbers, sort of go beep, boop, 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 getting in. All kinds of cool ways you can sort of do it around it, and all kinds of ways runners can sort of figure it out. For example, sure, most eye sensors are developed enough where they can detect if you're just holding up a ripped out eyeball to a reader, but if you walk up to a guard, point a gun at his head and say, look into this or I'll kill your family, he goes, sure. Or even better, if you walk up to a guard and, go, you are mine, and cast mind magic on them, you would open the door for me. And they look in and open, easy. Other technical security that works really well, and I'd say the most common part of technical security, are alarm systems. So everyone loves an alarm system. They can be silent or loud, and both play a purpose, and honestly, both probably exist at a specific. So a silent alarm goes off so that the runners aren't aware that their intrusion has been noted, to protect people on the site from any rash action. So for example, if someone detects runners go off and they hit the silent alarm button, a little buzzer might go off in a security office somewhere going bzzz, cameras pull up and they see, oh boy, that's 5 runners, and they mobilize a squad to take them out before they know what's happening. The loud alarm is sort of the opposite, where you sort of walk in and then immediately klaxons go, runners, dreck themselves, look around, like, oh god, we've been made, we got to pull out, otherwise we're going to get screwed. Because you can sort of really play up how over the top they can be, and they can be faking it, because the loud alarms are basically to alert everyone, no matter what, that there's an issue. and to tell the runners, we know there's an issue, get out before we hurt you. So you could do crazy stuff like have a countdown timer appear in the all the clocks in the all the screens in the office building. Say, high threat response has been called. Estimated time of arrival, 1 minute. So players go, or runners go, oh no, and decide to run. HDR might not have even been called. You can do that kind of stuff. Again, legwork so they can figure it out, but it's all sort of a way of trying to get inside their head of security. Now, what can set off an alarm? Well, a lot of things. I'm just going to run through them because these are sort of sensors. So wires, tripwires, and lasers. So I mentioned them a little bit earlier, but you can just have ultraviolet lasers that you sort of need to, use the whole sort of squirt into the air, see the laser and gymnastics around. And you can only really get past these mazes with the escape artist skill, which makes it useful. Then you've got pressure pads and meshes. So I mentioned that before. Pressure pads can look like a tile. Pressure meshes look like effectively camo netting. You step on them, and then you hear a click. You're like, uh-oh. And then when you step off them, an alarm can happen. So you can sort of avoid setting them off if you're quick enough. Motion sensors. So if a door's not meant to open, then it suddenly swings open, can send off a silent alert, all kinds of stuff like that. Olfactory sensors. That smells like gunpowder. Beep, 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 beep. Sound detectors. It starts hearing people who aren't identified. It could send a silent alert for a human to go, no, that's fine, or oh, no, that's bad. Cyberware or mad scanners. If you walk through an airport security with 15 machine guns and they start going, got an issue here, and all that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds, and you can also just hit a panic button. Panic buttons are very common staples of the old lore before you could just have instant communication with anyone on the planet. There used to be this large button that you'd smack to make sure that everyone was aware that there was an intrusion happening. Now they're virtual mostly. You can sort of just text to the security saying, help shadowrunners in a building. But some would still have hardwired buttons that you can just go, danger, danger, because harder to hack that. Speaking of hacking, we might talk about the Matrix next. So, most corporations will have a host. It's just the way of the world. If a corporation has a website or a server or something they would use today, they're going to have. So, if you look at the sample host ratings in the 5th edition core rulebook for the host design area, a corporation's host, depending on where you're hitting, is probably going to be 6 or 7 or 8. So for small colleges, universities, local police, international polyclubs, and social media, 5 or 6. Matrix games, local corporate hosts, large universities, and low-level government, 7 to 8. 9 to 10, regional corporate hosts, and 11 to 12, mega corporate headquarters. So if you're going up against anyone, not a mom and pop, actually a corporation that's, got employees and knows what they're doing and uses a computer to do their job, because most of jobs in a corporation office are digital, then it's going to be probably a 6 or a 7 or an 8. Now, hosts are weird beasts, and my pro tip, if you haven't read Kill Code, don't worry. If in doubt, make a data host. Just the stand host in the core rulebook, because they are still your stock standard. They're easy to use, and sort of you don't have to get too into them. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so how do I build a host? Well, the first things you need to do is align the arrays. So that's attack, sleaze, firewall, and data processing. Each of these does sort of mean something, especially if that's top. So for example, if you are hitting a host with attack being the top, that means the corporation is expecting the intrusion countermeasures, or the ICE, to just fucking shred the runners into the next dimension. Which is a play for some corps. I'm looking at you, MCT.
Hi.
It's not the most common. Sleaze usually means something in the host is running silent, or the host itself is running silent, and they need to hide. There's not really other reasons for sleaze to be that high. Data processing is used for hosts where a lot of administration goes on, so that's a common top one for anything where a lot of data needs to be processed. DP will probably be really high, and firewall is just stopping people from getting into your host, which, let's be real, is going to be the highest. It's going to be either data processing or firewall, the highest in 9 out of 10 cases. So you've got the outside of the host. Now what? Well, you need to figure out what goes into the host to defend it. So data trails is your friend here because they've got 2 different stat blocks for security spiders. They've got like standard security spiders and then like regular security spiders, security technomancers, demigods, all that kind of stuff. My top tip, just if you have Hero Lab, you can just whip out the encounter builder, and I think you can do this on the free version as well. Just search spider, pull up one of those, and that's your dude. Don't have to think about it. They've got all the stats there. Boom. Don't have Hero Lab, just have data trails on hand, pull up, and then you've got the stats there. Easy as pie to do, and can sort of just handle it. In most of my security corporate hosts, I have one PR4 security spider who's sort of the boss, and I might have some junior security spiders who are there to sort of handle some low-level stuff, but don't expect junior security spiders to do anything. One important thing is spiders can't stay up forever, eternally, all the time. Shift changes happen. I'll describe them later on when I talk about personnel security. But you've got to not just treat spiders as a robot. They are people, and they fall asleep, and they are blackmailable as well. And where the spider exists is also an important thing. So some people put them on site, and that's a very good tactic because it means that if an alert goes off on site, you are most likely able to get within 100 meters to begin hacking any interlopers. So, for example, you're working in an office building, remembering that office buildings tend to go 100 meters up and down. So you're in the middle, and someone sparks the alarm. You matrix perception over there, spot a couple of comlinks, and decide to attack the weakest one. Maybe a metalink that the mage could only afford through Carjam. Get a hack on the fly of that. Maybe it's slave to the decker if they're smart. So you go one-on-one with that, and if you manage to get the mark off, you've got a couple evil tricks you can do. You can start messing with AR displays for the mage, making him see things that aren't there. Or you can use the bootstrap program to bootstrap some code when the comlink, so when it turns on, the next time when it turns off, the next time it turns on, it sends a ping of where it is located, which is really good if you want to send a corporate hit squad after everyone goes Matrix Dark. I've done some really fun stuff, hacking if there's a rigger who's gone in, hacking them to take control of their drones, swapping their IFF and having their players' drones start shooting their team, all kinds of gross stuff you can. Now, that does mean that if the spider is on site, you can also deal with them, take them out, assassinate them, make them sick, make them not want to come in today, which is fine. That's something you should be wanting to do. It also means you have to probably come up with a name for the spider, maybe like a 2-sentence idea of who that. If the spider's offsite, they can be anywhere in the world. You could have some guy in China who's just outsourcing technical support to a big company, because on the Matrix in a host, noise doesn't exist. However, it means they're probably slower to respond to physical threats. As if an alarm goes on, like how many times have you been in a situation where you need to wake up, immediately go to your computer, and just be ready to do something? It might take a minute, could take 30 seconds, but it's not going to happen in like that. So that's one way. Also, blackmail tends to be much more effective because there's a physical distance between the person and what they're guarding. They don't have as much skin in the game. So if someone comes to you and threatens to kill your family, unless you shut down the matrix security or let someone through, well, it becomes a more easy decision for some people. So we've got the spiders, ice. I should have thought about detailing some ice, but there are two real main ways of handling ice, in my opinion. You've got friendly hosts and you have unfriendly hosts. So friendly hosts are like stuff like the Seattle government hosts, where they do all the administration, or maybe a Horizon host. These things aren't here to kill you. They're just, please, sir, please leave, please. So they're things like jammer ice that hits your attack rating so you can't use many attack actions. Or they're things like scramble ice, which will just... Scramble ice is a fun one. If the host has 3 marks on you and the scramble ice hits you, just instantly rebooted. Very powerful, but only really useful if the player has screwed up a few hack on the flies, or if you've got a probe ice going pew pew pew. So friendly hosts, I usually have a probe ice because you want more marks to tell the players to go away, and then stuff that debuffs them. So like not tar baby. There's one which sort of like reduces your initiative by 5, and there's one that sort of impacts your firewall or your data processing or your sleaze. The sleaze is a fun one because it means it's easier for the spiders to spot you. Because look, let's be real. Most of the time, if a player is spotted on a host, it's because they've failed a hack on the fly against a file or a thing on the host. Host gets a mark, the ice knows where they are, and they will start attacking them. The spider will then log in and go, "What? What's going on?" and try and figure out the problem. So if the ice can manage to whittle down the security, the interlopers' defenses, the better for everyone else. Unfriendly hosts are the ones where you start encountering biofeedback, or tar babies, which try and link lock you so they can trace your location to send hit squads to shoot you in the head. So these ones are the ones you hear horror stories about. Black ice just spawning and trying to kill you. That's a fun one for MCT. They will just fucking murk you. And all kinds of crazy stuff. Have fun with it. Pick some stuff that'll make the players go, "Ugh," and not want to hit it. And one thing I should mention is that in data trails there is a little table which tells you how fast the host can respond to any given sort of intruder. Basically, if a host gets bigger, that means it's harder to scan through all the information on it to find out where the intruder is. So I'm looking at it right now, and I've posted it into voice chat, but it's in data trails. 1 to 2 rating host will scan you every combat turn because there's not much data. 5 to 6, 1d6 plus 2 combat turns. You can do a lot in like 4 combat turns. 7 to 8, 2d6 combat turns. So an average of 7 combat turns before the patrol ice actually gets off its ass to do a thing. So you've got, the bigger the host is, weirdly and paradoxically enough, less like you are to be scanned by the patrol ice. I should also talk about nested hosts. So these are, before kill code existed, hosts were just sort of like this weird online realm where everything was sort of in one place. Time and space didn't exist. You could just float over to a restricted section. There was no mechanical way to... That's changed. Nested hosts are now hosts within a host, which you can sort of keep all your goods. And if you fail hacking that host, it's much worse than if you... because you have to be inside that host to actually target it. So a common one is a security nest. So basically that's where all the security devices are held, and the security nest can look out and see what's happening inside the regular host, but can't be interacted with from outside. So they're just sitting in and protected by another wall, meaning you have to jump over it. Another one is like a sort of laboratories area where the scientists working on a certain thing all log in and sort of put down files and all that kind of stuff. So you have to get into there. All the stuff that you wouldn't want just floating on any Tom, Dick, and Harry that gets access. They're the big boy host. Speaking of access, so this is based on the 5th edition core rulebook, and something that gets overlooked. When not in use, any file that doesn't need to be open on the host is most likely going to be in the archive. So if it's a restricted file, it's almost certainly going to be in the archive and pulled out when needed. Because pulling a file out of the archive is as simple as going to the spider and saying, hey, spider, can you access this file? Spider presses 2 buttons and provides it to you. So for things like, a Google document about when Stacy's coming into work, or the boring shit that wage slaves do, that's not going to be in the archive much. But anything like, what are the security plans, are going to be kept in there because they're going to be used for, onboarding a new employee, which might not happen every day, but it might, depending on the size of your company. Or, I need to find out who the corporate security are, or that kind of stuff. It's probably not going to be just out in the open, except, as I said before, Shadowrun's a game of exceptions. You might have corporate security that have immeasurably bad operational security or matrix security, and they just sort of leave stuff lying around. You might have a decker who doesn't think, security's decker who doesn't think anything's going to be attacked, so he just leaves it out there, or he just changes the name, or just puts an encryption on it because he can't be bothered. That kind of stuff. Now, there is a way to get information out of the Foundation without having to do a Foundation dive. And I think some of you are wondering, oh no, I don't want to do a Foundation, they seem scary. Don't worry, there are so many ways that, honestly, it's kind of sneaking into a Foundation to get files seems like somewhat irrelevant. But the main two are finding the spider, pointing a gun to his head, and saying, give me this file or I'll kill you. Which is one way, or, legwork, find out if he's got any weaknesses or she has any weaknesses, and then begin the blackmail. Or you can use the masquerade ability. So players could pretend to be, Mr. Security Officer number 2, and Mr. Security Officer number 2 is on the host. You get 2 marks on him, 2 marks on the spider, and then you masquerade the spider saying, hello, I am Mr. Security Officer 2. I require information about the security files. Alrighty, sir. 1 second. Beep, boop, boop. There you go. Emails it to you directly because masquerade redirects messages for him to you. You don't even have any encryptions or data bombs on it. It's just yours. Only issue is if the IT guy and the security talk, then you might have an issue. But, again, exceptions. And the last thing I'll mention about the Matrix is wired security. Usually this is for the more paranoid, because while it's kind of safer, it's also more risky. Because if a hacker gets on site and they take out the security decker, that hacker is effectively control of the entire system. The hurdle that most runners don't get past is getting on site as a decker. So there are 2 real ways to do an offline host. One is just a network of wired devices where you've just got a bunch of wires connecting cameras to a rig control console and a rigger looking at it. That is very dangerous because there's a lot of points where, say, for example, the decker gets on site, plugs his brain into a lock, which is connected by wired to that rigger, and then kills that rigger with biofeedback. Then there's no master of the device, or he can bootstrap that device to make him sort of have control over it, or get 3 marks on it and start using control device to start opening doors. He will effectively become the spider. The other way is using an offline host, which makes it much harder to do, But offline hosts still have the downside of you can shoot an offline host. You can kill the hardware that a host is running off, and then that will shut down everything. Get rid of the power to the offline host, and then it goes down, might have some time to boot back up. That means the security might not be on. Alternatively, the security might activate no matter what. Guns might pop out and start shooting anything. Your mileage may vary, and as a GM, you can sort of pick and choose what you want to do, but there's some fun stuff you can do. And the other reason offline hosts are really, really good is because they have ice. Not great ice, but you can still have ice, so it's a little easier than just getting a mark on a thing and doing that. Yeah, wired security, usually more expensive as well because you actually have to pay for all the wires and you have to retrofit it into the actual construction so you don't have just wires hanging around, because if you have wires hanging around, boop, data tap, you're in. Now, magical security. This is something that a lot of people don't super know how to deal with, which is fine because it's weird, but it's also the most expensive security that you can buy, because most magical security is hiring mages. Mages have big paychecks, and oh boy. So the standard one are wards and astral barriers. Wards are basically astral walls that stop people from floating into the area and stopping you from getting into the places you want. You can sneak around them, or you can break through them. Breaking through them alerts the ward that, or alerts the owner of the ward that it has been broken. Sneaking through doesn't. But the only real issue wards give runners is the ability to not easily go through it, and just kind of like hopping over a wall. Doesn't stop many people, just slows them down. Now, there are other kinds of wards that can do more fun stuff, but they require a bit more money from the corporation because you require someone who's got the skills for it, and usually it requires some initiations as well. But there are entire corporations who hire out mages to do this kind of stuff. So you've got charged wards, who are very fun, but they can deal some damage to you if you touch them too much. And you've got alarm wards as well, who can start doing all crazy stuff. You've got like window wards, so you can see out through it. Honestly, just have a look at Street Grimoire. There's some real fun things you can do. And one thing I should mention is anchored wards usually have a physical thing that they're anchored to. If that gets destroyed, then the ward breaks. So there is physical ways to get around wards as well. Another one, which is not in 5th edition and probably never will because 6th edition's out, are living walls. So these are like awakened dual-natured ivy. They're very expensive. Because it's dual-natured, you can't pass through it. Issue is, if it dies, then it's not dual-natured anymore, so you can just sort of walk through. Fluorescent astral bacteria is also a fun one, but it's a much, much more niche. And again, CGL has forgotten half of the rules for this, but as a GM, you can hand wave some stuff. So there are 3 types of fab. Fab 1 glows in the presence of astral entities. So it gives off a pungent, like sort of musty odor. So if you're in a facility where they've spent money on having fab, when a astral form penetrates the wall, the fab glows, a light sensor detects the glow, and then starts going beep, 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 and alerts people that there is a mage in the area, and then they just send in a spirit or a astral mage to go beat that person up. Fab 2 clings to the astral entity so that you can, in real life, follow where that person's going, because the bacteria has attached itself to effectively your soul, and it's floating around trying to glow while it's on you. Now, in older editions, and feel free to house rule this, there were dual-natured net guns, which you could use to honk and capture someone who is just kind of floating around. They're expensive and very, very annoying to use because they're an exotic weapon, but If you've just got that on a drone, which has gunnery, doesn't matter about the exotic weapon skill, you can just have a rigger just start going thunk, catching astral forms in a bag. Fab 3 is the dangerous one, and is actually kind of ridiculously cheap when you think about it. But Fab 3 clings and kills astral entities. It's the stuff they used in Chicago. It is nasty. I'm not entirely sure the rule off the top of my head, but if you get sprayed with that, you are fucked. So you really definitely do not want to deal with that. I've used that for areas where bug spirit research is happening, or like really nasty spirit stuff's happening, and they need to be able to douse an area in Mage Go Bye-Bye. The upside to all these fab bacteria stuff, mundanes are just not affected. So if your entire security is mundane, you can just hit a button, suddenly some smelly water falls from the earth, or falls from the roof, and you're fine, but everything else is dying. Another good ritual that sees a lot of use are watchers. Watchers are effectively mobile security guards. They just sort of like wander, no, not security guards, security cameras. They don't do much, and you can kill them without much effort. They just sort of go, whoa, patrol around, make sure that people are where they're supposed to be, and all that kind of stuff. And if they spot something, they might go, ah, and then run to their mage and start screaming, there's someone in the building who's not meant to be here. A common strat is to have pairs of watchers, so that the watchers watch the watchers. So if a watcher detects someone, both of them will start screaming backwards, so that you can't just sort of put a bubble around one and then beat it up. You now have to deal with two. Sadacrup in particular loves their watchers. I believe in one of the security sections, they say they have enough watchers to play a football game. So they're fun. They don't do much, but they are alerts, and they can spot mundanes as well. Though, from a GM side of view, don't have watchers if you don't bring any mages, unless you tell the players through legwork that watchers are a thing, because there's just nothing an mundane can do to stop that. Just, an astral entity saw you and ran away to its boss, and then told you, and then your entire infiltration was ruined. Not fun. Another thing you can do with watchers is have them just follow people. So if you're needing to like follow employees to figure out where they go, you can just do that with a watcher. The employee mundane doesn't know what's happening. Or follow shadowrunners. Again, only really do this if there's a mage on the team who can sort of see it potentially. If they don't look, but the watcher can just follow them to where they go, and then can come back and report, and then boom, hit squad. Other types of spirits that are effective are like just regular spirits. Bounce, great, because you can just give them the order, kill any intruders. Really easy. You can just have that set and forget, and it's on site. They're somewhat expensive, but not really. They're very draining to the summoners who handle that. So there's usually only one, maybe two, but not higher force. Be aware that spirits are dangerous. They can absolutely dunk on someone really, really quickly if they're too high force. My advisement is keep it to force 6 as maximum, unless you're doing something really, really scary. Then probably limit it at force 8. Force 9 is something that is a prime run like that. You can theoretically deal with a force 9 or a force 10, but when you get to those levels of numbers, it's incredibly hard to hit them. They deal a ridiculous amount of damage, and they are just incredibly tanky because they've got immunity to normal weapons. So it's just not fun fighting like anything double digit or 9. Force 8 can still make you go. And there are wild spirits as well who can sort of corporate kami are a thing in a lot of Japanese security, where they just sort of will protect their corporation. And finally, for magic, mages on site or just astral observers. So you can just hire a guy in security to be a mage who floats around and sort of. Sometimes you can have a room where they've got optical cord going through, acting as a secondary camera system, so they can just cast spells from being in a bubble. Not all corporations are going to spend the amount of money that is required to have optical cable all around there. Also, if you shine a light bright enough into an optical cable, it can blind the mage, which is always fun. So laser pointers are very effective. Some spells to keep in mind for these mages: detect firearms or detect life. If they feel someone's being followed or if there are some issues, you can use detect life and figure out, hey, there's only meant to be 7 guards on duty. Why am I detecting 12 metahumans? That seems like an issue. And you kind of get their vague location as well, depending on how many hits. Detect firearms is just fun because, yeah, firearms might have 9 or 12 object resistance, but you only need 1 hit. So you can figure out where people are trying to smuggling guns or weapons. Stun ball is very good for large AoE. Doesn't do much damage, but it doesn't hurt anything on the physical plane. It just sort of knocks people out, which is very good. Chaotic World, anything that makes the runners less effective is better. So Chaotic World will just give them -1 per net hit, which is, on top of all the other things, really good. Trid Phantasm is an evil one. You can have a Trid Phantasm of corporate security kicking in the fucking windows, rolling up with machine guns and starting to open fire. And the runners might go, shit, take cover! And jump behind it and start shooting them. And then they go, wait a minute. And then the real security come from behind to shoot them when they're not in cover. Powerball, another solid spell, really good against drones and just people on armor. This one is sort of not as useful in a building, but flamethrower or a fireball, if the shit's hit the fan and you just need to singe a fragger, yeah, they can just start throwing out indirect spells. Net Bind is really fun. It's basically you cast it, and for each net hit, it's -1 agility. And if you hit 0, your arms and legs freeze up and you become stuck. It doesn't get used much, but slapping a mage with that, or slapping, a decker, or even a street samurai and reducing their agility to from 7 to 4 or 3 can be a really, really powerful force multiplier on your end. Agony is sort of just increasing the wound modifier. It's not great on people with pain editors, but most people don't have that. Bugs is also very solid, making it look like bugs are crawling out of every orifice. And glue strip is also good to make people not run away. So finally, personnel security. So guard animals. Guard animals are great. The go-to is dogs. Dogs are an amazingly good guard animal because they're loyal, they're trainable, they have high scent, they've got really keen smell and hearing, so they can hear when people are sneaking in, or I can smell them and go, which is really good for dealing with invisible threats. And they're really good at tracking. You can have a dog start rolling the tracking roll and start sniffing down where a runner may have physically ran away or is hiding, or that kind of stuff. So dogs are really good, and you can just unleash them in a pack to try and take down lightly armored enemies. Paracritter dogs like Barghests and Hellhounds are basically the new game plus of dogs. Barghests can go awoo, and then suddenly everyone's frozen on the spot because they have a paralyzing howl. It's really, really effective. Issue is it can also affect the guards on site, so you want to make sure that that's being handled properly. And Hellhounds, which can shoot fire and are just in general nastier, dual-natured versions. So both of the Barghest and Hellhounds are dual-natured, so they can attack astral interlopers as well. So this next one may feel like a bit of a joke, but I assure you, it is an incredibly good sort of Security animal. If you've ever played the goose game, you know how effective geese are at stopping someone from doing what they want to do. Geese are loud and geese are angry. You put a goose in an area, they will run up to shadowrunners who are in full combat and have guns and go honk, 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 and start like flapping their wings and going honk, 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 and just causing a fuss. And that's all they need to do. They're basically an alarm system that just sort of runs up to them and squawks and honks and makes a bunch of noise. Some security things you can do are improving the geese so that their fucking screams are like at 110 decibels, so they sound like mega honks. Or you could just have them just keep following the runners and just being a mess. Now, the only real reason, like the only real way to stop a goose from following you is to grab it by the throat and then yeet it away or shoot it. But they're angry boys. Now, there's all kinds of other stuff like basilisks, cockatrices, ghouls also get used by as technology sometimes. Some of them are more out there, some of them less so. But the most important thing is anytime that there is, especially a paracritter, but anytime there's like critters, you usually want a dedicated animal handler who knows how to deal with them. That could be a guy with a button that detonates all the bombs in their head. It could be a rigger who is actively, controlling them with bio wires. It could be just a shaman who's got a beast spirit who's commanding them, or it could just be a guy who's got a lot of dots in the animal handling skill and is basically the alpha of the pack. You deal with him. You can deal with the guard animals, especially if the guard animals are being abused or they don't actually want to be in sort of captivity. So do keep in mind that you'll probably want someone who's keeping the animals in control, and animals are probably not going to be used inside, the outside things. Another thing about personnel security is corporations love their counterintelligence. They will spy on all of their employees to make sure they're being loyal little cogs, knowing what they're doing. They might have like worms on their comlink that sort of tell them which websites they browse. They might have security watching for potential code, like words appearing in direct messages, or they might try and detect suspicious calls to avoid scams, they might say, but in fact it's to stop exfiltration attempts or extraction attempts. They might hire homeless people to stay outside their offices and watch who comes and goes. They might put fake information out on the matrix. So when you do your T3s or T6s, you might find some shadowrunner give a conflicting report saying, no, you should find this guy, he's compromised, and will totally do everything you say. It might not be. Again, you got to make sure the runners can look further into any counterintelligence so that they know that there's the potential for them to be set up. Because you don't want to get them with gotchas. You want them to have that moment of going, aha, I figured it out. Oh no. One time this has happened. Envious Shadow did this to me, and I will never forgive him for it. But my hacker had hacked a host like a bunch of times and failed. And I managed to break in and found the security file, but it wasn't protected. It was just floating there. That set off alarm bells. I started reading through it, and it said, there's a convoy that happens every Friday night, which is very weak and totally not a trap. Then the team are like, this feels like a trap. Let's watch this convoy. And we had someone watch the convoy, and like inside the the vehicles was just an armored up security team that were waiting for us. And we're like, oh no. So that's the kind of stuff you can do. But that feeling of figuring it out is amazing because you go, oh no. And the other thing with personnel security is shifts. No one can do an entire 24-hour shift. That shift change has to happen sometime. Usually that's around 7 a.m. or just before like 8 a.m. Where The night shift are the tiredest, and they do the swap then. Take that to advantage. You can't have, if there's a security shaman, they'll need to resummon all their spirits. The deckers will need to load back in, all that kind of stuff. Shifts are your friend as a GM to allow for changing in NPCs. Maybe the night shift is really, really hardcore, but the day shift isn't. Or maybe the day spider is a really big fan of anime, whereas the night one thinks the day spider's anime is waifu is shit. You have all kinds of ways of changing up the NPCs, but just keep in mind that even with pain editors, everyone needs sleep editors, I should say. Everyone does need to get some shut eye, otherwise they'll be run ragged. So, common tactics and goons. So the most common tactic that all corporate security use is PR2 goons, who are your bread and butter. They're just mall cops, effectively, who go around making sure that people feel safe. They don't actually provide security. They might have some basic training and know how to use a pistol once or twice. And their job is to make sure that if something bad happens, they call the big guys. The big guys roll up and start shooting when they can get here. HTR are the hammer drop. Not every corporation has them, but any corporation of importance usually will have some sort of response team. And they're your boogeymen. They're the reason why the runners are on a timer. If the alarm goes off, play them smart, play them tactical. They have the home ground advantage, and they want to drop with overwhelming force. If HTR rolls up, there's a high potential runners can just straight up die. Keep that in mind, and make sure runners know that HTR don't fuck around. Now, on the previous point, not all corporate security guards are bad, especially the AAA corps or any corporation that actually gives a damn about security. They tend to actually hire security guards, teach them how to use guns, give them machine guns. And in a lot of cases, corporate security are also corporate military. So the only difference is you can't really use, fuel air bombs in an office building because collateral damage, So usually you get these PR2 goons to contain and neutralize. Lead them to the traps, put them into the gas vent room, or lead them down the corridor with machine gun turrets, or try and just keep them away from what they need to be kept away from. They're roadblocks, they're speed bumps. They're not going to fight to the end. They will retreat, unless there are extraneous circumstances. Knight errant might have some bug spirits, and they don't want you to figure out that the person you're trying to extract is a queen. Say to Krupp, they don't want to piss off their fucking dragon CEO, and are more scared of him than they are of you. All that kind of stuff. A few things about getting around all the security that I've mentioned. Humans are almost always the weakest link. Allow them to be abused as a GM and make flawed NPCs. The most boring thing you can do is say everyone in this facility is an upstanding citizen and would never betray the corporation. Yawn. Maybe have one or two guys who are loose cannons, or it doesn't even have to be active traitors, just someone with shadows that you can use to your advantage, or maybe someone who has vices or virtues that can be exploited. Have fun with your NPCs. Secondly, budgets aren't infinite. Knight Errant's rule of thumb is that no security system should cost more than 10% of the total value of the assets the system is designed to safeguard. And security budgets don't add value to a corporation. All they do is stop a corporation from losing things. I don't know if you've ever seen how some corporations make decisions, but they will cut corners and figure out ways to make a buck everywhere. If that means making it so that their employees don't wear the amount of protective gear because it saves them $5 in the long run, they fucking will. And if that means they don't hire magical security at all because only 1% of 1% of the population can actually do anything against them, and they run the odds and say, yeah, fuck it, then they just won't. They might not pay attention much to matrix security. They might skimp on the physical security because they think that their technological security is all-knowing, and then somehow people keep getting around it. most corporate entities will have some level of security forces just for insurance, because if you've got security, then your insurance premiums are going to be lower. But a lot of the time, it might just be bare minimum. And players might be able to figure that out, figure out where the middle manager in Tokyo has cut corners in like the Seattle building to try and make his quarterly report more interesting. So, end comments, be creative, have fun with it, read up the core rulebook in 5e. There's some really good stuff in the physical security section, but remember to make it solvable. Add 1 or 2 holes into a corporate area. I add 3 usually or more, because runners might not find it all. I try and make it so that there's 3 ways you can get in, and then detail some NPCs that can be liabilities to the corporation. But that's just me. Other people might have other things. And remember, most importantly, if a crime is permitted on extraterritorial territory, they haven't done a crime on UCAS soil. So why should the cops care? Because they haven't done a crime on that the cops care about. Corporate entities, as a double-edged sword of extraterritoriality, can do anything, but can't go crying to the government for help when they can't protect their own facilities. So only really Knight Errant can chase people off their facilities to continue shooting them, because Knight Errant owns the sort of cop license. However, other corporate security entities do have the ability to kill and chase. It gets iffier when they're killing people and chasing people to do things that weren't on UCAS soil. For example, say I sneak into a building, steal a MacGuffin, and run away. Corporations are well within their rights to try and reclaim that stolen property, but that's basically all they can really do. If they try and kill you extra legally, they can't do that, because that's stepping over a line legally that they could get sued for, or they could have their extraterritoriality revoked for if it's big enough. Now, if that same thing happened on UCAS soil, where they're not extraterritorial, and like this corporate goon squad follows you and kills you, that's fine, because you might have killed someone on UCAS soil and now they're trying to get that back. It's a weird one. Just keep it in mind. And yeah, that sort of ends my masterclass. I don't know if I'd call it a masterclass.
I would.
That's all the brain funk that's gone into there. So we might move into the Q&A. And I'm going to try and find some other GMs real quick who might help answer some questions. So give me about 3 minutes. Feel free to unmute, have a chat. We're still recording, but let me just try and rustle up a posse.
Envious and sad don't count. So, how are you boys doing? Fine then. Feel like that. Normal.
Oh, great.
Fine.
Just doing fine, yeah.
There we go. Like, yeah, I wasn't gonna get too flirtatious. Just a mild bit of flirt. Just since this is the topic of the day, everybody is of consenting age, yes? Well, shit. Fuck the base.
All right, we'll just go with me and Karen for now. So, questions. First in best dressed.
I got one.
Oh,
Yeah. So, as you were saying, in a really high security host, it'll take a long time for for the patrol ice to get around to scan you. What else can be done to keep, to keep a prospective decker from, accessing everything he needs in the 7 combat turns before it comes down on him, other than just data bombing everything.
Encryptions.
Yeah, and you can also hire more regular deckers to sort of scan this. And I should have mentioned this as well. Troubleshooters are a very important thing to sort of have. Troubleshooters are, if the decker is blasted off the matrix, they step in and try and deal with that. So they're basically the in-between demigods, which are the HTR and just regular response. So they roll up and try and like dunk on you. So troubleshooters are very important. They're much better, and they can actually usually go toe-to-toe with regular deckers. Demigods and greater demigods are like HTR, so they can roll up and start kicking your Drek in. One also thing you can do, Technomancers can use sprites. They're rarer, but a Technomancer security sort of spider can just have a data sprite that is floating around and rolling matrix perception, because data sprites can do it quicker. Junior security spiders can just be given the role, hey, roll matrix perception, and if you see something, let us know. They only roll 6 dice or 8 dice if they're in HOTS and VR, so they're not great. But hiring more people to look out means you're putting more money into it, which, again, you might want to cut costs, and B, doesn't always help, because especially with how the matrix is set up currently, it's incredibly easy to just continue go running silent and just hide.
I guess.
Go ahead.
I suppose that another thing constraining Technomancers from being on every host is there's a lot of thematics concerns with certain corporations having less friendly relations with the Technomancer community.
Yeah, MCT still hires Technomancers, but
just
hires is
hunting to a whole new level.
Yeah, look, may more be data slave.
Right.
You might see a sprite, because you can just sort of like they ridiculously cheap, and you don't have to pay anything to like bind them effectively, and you can send that off into a host purely to detect resonant signatures if it's a high rating host or an MCT host or something.
Bob.
Yes.
So obviously you covered like a little bit of like the fact that various corporations are different. So how would corporate security, again, I can't, you obviously can't really ask in general because it'll vary, but like, do you have any particular tips for, okay, that most classic of runs, you need to grab someone from this corporation and they're not going to want to come with. How does security deal with specifically extractions instead of, say, physical item thefts?
Okay, extractions are a fun one because it depends on the corp, and I'll actually just pull up a list of the big 10 corporations to sort of run you through vaguely what might happen, because each of them has a different sort of response. Usually if someone's trying to, depending on how much money it is, they will attempt to stop you stealing them, and if it's really important, they would attempt to deny the enemy from getting them. That might involve shooting them in the back of their head. So, Ares macro technology, if they don't want to come along with you, they're probably trained in the art of karate and will probably try and pull a gun on you and shoot you in fight you every step of the way. Ares have this whole idea of family and protection, and they'll probably try and swoop in and save you, and no soldier left behind. As technology, we'll just detonate the fucking cranial bomb in your head and try and take some of the runners with you. They do not give a crap, because if you know too much, you know too much, and they will just kill you. Evo are weird. Usually, there's nothing stopping people from leaving, but people who want to work at Evo don't want to work anywhere else because they're just happier working at Evo because they feel accepted. Horizon, sort of similar. They don't want to leave, and they might just defect or become a double agent. Horizon aren't going to try and shoot them. They might even just let you out and say, oh, well, if you wanted to leave, you could have just asked. Bye. Mitsuhama, again, will just shoot you. If you look like you're defecting, they will just gun you down. Spinrad, we have no knowledge of. Renraku Computer Systems, it depends. It honestly depends on... Like, they might shoot you, they might try and protect you. If you're being protected by, like, Red Samurai, they'll do anything in their ability to protect your life. But again, like, they're one of the iffy ones. Seda Krupp, again, that depends. They might, like, if Seda Krupp wants to keep you, they might get into a shadow war where they keep extracting you back, or they might kill you. Shiawaze are probably just going to try and extract you back. And Wujing, same as above, they might just extract you back.
Okay, so is there a general sort of cultural thing you can expect of the extractee, the person who is being unwillingly extracted?
Depends on the morale and what they think the corporation will do if they fight back or if they don't fight back. They go into it a little bit in Stolen Souls, which I'd recommend everyone read because it's a very, very good source of just security information. But as technology, they will fight you because they know they're going to die. Same with like a lot of the Japanacorp ones. But if morale is low in Ares Macrotechnology and they hate their job, hate their life, they might come willingly. It sort of depends. If you come up and say, we will steal your family out with you so you're not alone, that might be enough to help them get on your side. If you put if you tell them that there's a lot of money in it for you, that might woo them. Vinegar, okay. Honey, that kind of stuff.
But there's basically the measures each corporation will take to prevent an extraction varies by corp, and the expected response of your target will vary. Okay. I was just wondering if there was a general piece, like a general sense of, okay, you can probably expect these things to be in place if you're trying to extract a high up executive versus if you're trying to extract Joe programmer.
Yeah, high up executives honestly get extracted so much that like a lot of the time they're just business as usual. If they're a really high up executive and they're being extracted because they know too much, they will 100% just be killed or activate their suicide pill. I believe Seda Krupp has... Oh yeah, no, totally. Seda Krupp has like an entire implanted comlink they have, don't they? Where they expect you to be extracted and then use it to sort of call for help. So they're probably not just going to murder you because, again, if the corporation looks after its people, it might not kill you, or it might. It depends on the security and the corporation and the context. Have fun with it. You can sort of design it what you want.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Well, not last hour. I can do this for like another half an hour. So feel free to just ask questions if they come to you or anything like that.
I just realized my mic was off.
Oh.
So one of the things I was going to say is don't sleep on the botanicals, like awakened plants. There are some very nasty things you can do with them. Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't actively gone into it. Again, a lot of this information has just been ignored by the 5th edition writers, which is really bad, but there's a treasure trove of interesting stuff. Like the parabotany, like there are trees that will like just make you want to climb them. That's all they do. But like they catch shadowrunners.
Then you put monowire in the tree.
Oh, that's evil. I like that. I'm hiring you as my corporate designer.
Yeah. Well, that tree not only makes you want to climb the tree, it makes you not want to hurt anybody.
Yeah, so you could plant them around your facility and just catch shadowrunners like that. Now, the issue is you could catch teenagers as well, which legal issues.
But if you have an enclosed area, it's extraterritorial. Plus,
you
also have to deal with it affecting your employees. Like your security personnel will be affected by that too. So you'd have to send drones or whatever to arrest
there's
them.
a radius. Don't go in that radius. It's just like a landmine.
That's one of the things about a lot of those area of effect sort of things, and just corporations care about their public image a lot, so they won't have anything like monowire on the outside fence. So when I mentioned that there's 2 fence systems a lot, the outside fence might have barbed wire and says no entry. The inside fence might be concrete but have monowire on it because you've just entered, and now they have legal right to do so. And most teenagers won't climb over a fence with barbed wire because barbed wire is, funnily enough, hard to climb over. So anyone who manages to get over that first hurdle is someone who is here to do you harm.
Plus, or really fucking stupid.
There's also stuff like the detective ficus, which it works as a smell sensor, so it can detect explosives and gunpowder.
Yep, a lot of cool stuff you can do with plants. Parabotany is a good book. There's
Yeah, Rule 0 and all that, right?
Yeah, you don't trick people into the Tomb of Horrors or a Zero Zone.
So,
Speaking
for example,
of Zero Zones,
I'll just pop in real quick. So on the legwork angle, one thing that I always do is I always try and take a rigger, because riggers are really good at recon. So the physical barriers, they'll be able to see, yep, okay, they've got a wall here. Oop, looks like monowire. If you get 4 hits, you detect there's some pressure meshes here, 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 and here. As you sort of go up, you see goons doing like that. And then the Decker online starts searching people up, finding out all the information, doing T6s, getting information saying, this person recently left and that and that. Wait a minute, that doesn't add up. And looking a bit into it, the face can start doing like legwork. Finding out that the person who recently quit, or talking to other shadowrunners about the times they've hit that facility. And that's why legwork's so important. It tells you about all these things.
I would also add that sometimes, no matter how much you telegraph a thing, no matter how easy it is for them to find, you will do a run where you have some trap that you expect them to see immediately that nobody even bothers checking, and it shoots somebody in the face.
So on the topic of Zero Zones, they were briefly mentioned. I know it's kind of a paradoxical question of like, what can you expect? But like, generally speaking, this kind of a multi-layered question. What could you expect in a hypothetical Zero Zone? And like, this like setup and layouts of Zero Zones, like would you have one inside of a non-Zero Zone where like a section of a compound is completely off limits and is itself a Zero Zone?
So one of the big things about the Zero Zone is it's weird. The Shadowrun writers are bad. So Zero Zone is a concept as well as a physical place. The Zero Zone philosophy means that technically every corporate security area where MCT operates is a Zero Zone. 0 penetration, 0 survival. That is their entire shtick, and they will throw everything at them. But Zero zones are highly automated, and this was being done in 4th edition. So now we're up to 6th edition. Expect very,
Can't say
very
that
automated
word.
stuff. Well, I can.
You're banned.
So
Banned. No,
one of
carry
the
on.
biggest things about MCT Zero Zones is they're going to have drones everywhere because drones don't hesitate to pull the trigger. Humans can feel a twinge of guilt, can hesitate before shooting the puppy in the head. A robot will just open fire. So in a Zero Zone, expect a lot of gun ports, a lot of automated security, and a lot of things that depend on MCT's really, really good matrix security. The C stands for computer, after all. Now, if you manage to get a hacker in or a wily face and manage to crack the system and get all the effectively permissions, you can walk into a Zero Zone unharassed, pick up a thing and leave. It is not unheard of, but MCT will fucking make you want to not do that. They will use like high-level power critters, some power critters that they don't even control. They just have in an area and say you're not allowed to go there, and if you go there, you die.
Right,
They
like
will
the-
use 7/7 instead of neurostun. They don't not use escalation. They come at you full force.
Oh, yeah.
It's
So,
pretty
like,
much GM's carte blanche to throw every evil, nasty things they can possibly think of at you. It's like, oh, the only place I can dive for cover is behind this small brick blockade over here. Well, there's landmines there, and that potted plant that's behind you just popped up now, and it's going to shoot you in the back.
One thing GM told me was, if ever you think, is this too mean? You go, yes, and that's exactly why I should do it.
yeah. Yep, Khan's ladder of escalation is not in effect in a MCT Zero Zone. Okay.
They will also be using a lot of magic because MCT are one of the biggest magical corporations in the world, weirdly enough. So all their forces will always include a mage or a shaman, usually a mage because shamans don't super like MCT because of the mining. They employ watchers and bound spirits, and they remember how I said like sometimes they'll use shamans to use beast spirits to control animals that can't usually be controlled. Yeah, MCT do that. Like juggernauts, for example. Technically, you can control a juggernaut with like the beast spirits control animal ability. And that's nothing you can really do to stop that, except for shooting the spirit. And if you shoot the spirit that has that ability, then the juggernaut goes loose and kills everything. One of the biggest things to deal with MCT meat responders, like physical humans, is they're trained to respond to threats without hesitation. However, because they follow orders without hesitation, they don't question orders. Meaning if your decker gets past their system and tells them Takahashi's squad is compromised, exterminate with prejudice, they'll just turn to Takahashi's squad and start gunning them down. Just because someone who sounded like or looked like their commander told them to do it. And then if you go to the other guy and say to Takahashi, Joji's squad is compromised, take them out. Well, they fucking know Joji's squad is compromised because they're shooting at each other. And then suddenly there's a intercorporate war happening on the ground and you can just walk around the back as the decker tries to figure out what's going on. For more information about the security they use, I would highly recommend reading up on corporate guide, the 3rd edition book. I forget what it is. Corporate download and corporate shadow files from 3E and 2E respectively, are really, really good for explaining what happens on MCT property. They talk about the training they use and all that kind of stuff. Corporate Guide talks about the newer sort of style, and Market Panic talks a little bit about it, but not. I definitely try and find those 2 older books, whip them out and read them because they're so useful.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Again, I've got like another 20 minutes, so. Fair enough, yep.
Going once.
I'll be hanging around in general chat later to just answer questions sort of off stream, so you can sort of just ask me about